When I got hands-on of the Switch 2, it really got me thinking about the glory days of Nintendo. Think back to the 2000s. You had the Wii, you had the DS. And I think, to me, this is the era where Nintendo were kind of at their best. They were quirky, they were weird, but they were doing stuff that no one else could. Which got me perusing eBay to purchase a console I've wanted for some time. The original, complete in box, Nintendo DS.
A wonderful day.
Free copy of Super Mario. Nintendo DS and
Only on Nintendo DS.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS.
All right, shall we, my friends?
Excited.
I am, oh, look at that. Oh, dude, it actually comes with a still sealed GameStop AC adapter for DS.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
Actually, I didn't know it was gonna come with that. And then we've got ourselves our DS. I owned a DS, but I owned a DS Lite. That was my first DS. So I actually never had the original fat DS until, obviously, many, many years after it came out. 21 years after, yikes. This DS can drink.
This drink, I like it. Another!
Behold, my friends, it's directly from GameStop in the year 2004, the Nintendo DS. Look at how lovely and weathered that sticker is. Play impressive new 3D rendered Nintendo DS games and play all your favorite Game Boy Advance games in single player mode. Would anyone like to take a guess at how much I paid for this complete in box copy of the DS with an additional little AC adapter?
I really hope that it's not more than like $200. I really hope.
So is that your guess, $200?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm guessing $333.
Wow, specific.
That is very specific. What if I told you that I purchased this Nintendo DS for $120?
What? Okay, all right.
You see why? At 11:45 the other night on eBay, I was like, oh, bye now. Look, come on. Okay, so I see the console itself. Let's start with that. Oh, bro, it has the lanyard still. This person kept their DS nice and safe. So it's in relatively good shape. It's a little dirty, for sure. It's a little dirty, a little bit scuffed. What's interesting about it is, so if you look on the bottom, there's a label here. Now, this I think would have had like the serial number and stuff on it, but it's whited out. But I'm looking at it, I almost wonder if like the actual label like faded. It would be weird for someone to put like just a generic white sticker over where that is. Because you can see here, when it goes into the box, you're supposed to be able to like scan the serial number here. Interesting. But we do have our DS card slot as well as our Game Boy Advance slot. Open it up here. Oh yeah, dirty. Oh boy, yeah, we're gonna need to do a little cleaning on this guy. That bottom touchscreen, oh yeah, okay. You know what, maybe I'm starting to see why this is $120. The bottom touchscreen has seen some aggression. You know, have we all not gotten upset at our stupid Nintendog for pooping on the yard?
Have you ever played Nintendogs?
Now, do we have, oh no, we don't have the, oh no, we do. Wait, we have more stuff. I thought do we have the game in here? Okay, we have Metroid Prime. Oh.
Totally
so maybe,
worth it. Totally
maybe the game didn't come with it.
Oh.
Okay, let's make sure at least it works. And then I'll feel a whole lot better about the rest of this video. Hey yo, let's go. There we go. That is a functional DS. I'd love to play a game for you right now. If I had one. So while this might not be the cleanest DS in existence, it is, I think, a really interesting look at what Nintendo did with this console that made it very different than not only all of the Game Boys that came before it, but importantly, it really set the stage for what Nintendo would do for the next 21 years. I don't like saying that out loud. I think it's worth thinking about just how different the Nintendo of the early 2000s was before they actually released the DS. They were coming off of 15 years of absolute dominance with the Game Boy, and yet Nintendo were ready to take a risk. The DS wasn't initially meant to actually replace the Game Boy. Instead, Nintendo, under the leadership of figures such as Iwata-san, positioned it as a third pillar alongside the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube. At the time, it would be easy to assume that Nintendo didn't have a lot of confidence in the DS. After all, they released the Game Boy Micro in 2005, 1 year after the DS went on sale. By having the DS coexist with the Game Boy as a third pillar, it allowed them to get really experimental. And experimental it was, because the DS was a massive change. It almost felt alien because it packed so many features unlike any mainstream handheld before it. I mean, there's stuff like a touchscreen interface, a built-in microphone, Wi-Fi, and obviously the dual screens. It was honestly pretty cutting edge for a portable in 2004. And while we might take a lot of this stuff for granted today, we were coming off of Game Boy Advance, which was, I mean, great, but cutting edge, maybe not. Speaking of the dual screens, arguably the most iconic feature of the DS wasn't actually going to be included originally. Back in the early 2000s, as Nintendo began developing what would come after the Game Boy Advance, the initial prototypes featured just a single display. However, Nintendo's president at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, made a demand that would change everything. A single screen was so Game Boy. The new handheld, it's gonna have dual screens. You know, I think it's worth taking a moment to appreciate just how quickly Nintendo was moving on handhelds back in the day. The DS launched just over 3 years after the Game Boy Advance. I mean, can you imagine a new console generation, even if it was technically just a new prong rather than a proper successor, coming out that fast today? I mean, we just waited 8 years between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. So, when the DS was first unveiled at E3 2004, the reception was mixed, shall we say. Many people just figured it was a bunch of gimmicks, a developer system, instead of the tried and true Game Boy formula. By contrast, Sony's upcoming PSP, with its beautiful widescreen display, more traditional controls, I mean, it was generating a lot more hype, especially among hardcore gamers. But let's face it, going toe-to-toe with Sony in a spec war was, well, it just wasn't gonna happen. Nintendo have always balanced just enough power in their handhelds alongside unique features to hit a reasonable price point. And I think that history has shown this to be the right call, especially in the mid-2000s. The DS enabled experiences that just simply weren't possible on other handhelds. I personally think it did a lot to expand the audience of gamers to a far larger, more casual audience. I mean, think about it. How many people bought a DS as their first console ever? Titles like Nintendogs, having you care for virtual puppies using the touchscreen and the mic, or Brain Age, turning mental exercises into a daily habit. I mean, these just weren't games, they were entirely new ways to interact. And keep in mind, this is all years before smartphones would become commonplace. And as we'll see shortly, it was a huge reason why the DS found popularity far outside the hardcore gamers and Nintendo fans who traditionally bought Game Boys and GameCubes and whatnot. In my opinion, this era was Nintendo at their absolute best, willing to take on enormous risks on concepts that seemed quirky and gimmicky at first, but the clean sheet design led to ideas that would influence gaming for years to come. In many ways, it's similar to what they'd later do with the Switch. And we all know how that one turned out. 100 bajillion sold. How many is it? 140? I think it's between 140 and 150 right now, right? It is, we're going to talk about it later in the script, but the Switch is about to be the most popular console of all time. Like, it is. People doubt Nintendo, man. They're like, I don't know about this thing, I don't know about this thing, and then it comes out and they go, oh, okay, yeah, everyone wants one. We get it now. When the DS finally hit North America in November of 2004 with a $149 price tag, surprise, surprise, it flew off shelves. Nintendo sold over 1 million units in the US alone in that first month. Launch software, like the surprisingly solid Super Mario 64 DS, showed off the 3D capabilities and touch controls, while the bundled demos like Metroid Prime Hunters, which I'd love to show you if, it came with my DS, it gave you a taste of first-person action. It was clear that Nintendo had momentum, but the hardware itself had some room to improve. In 2006, just 2 years after the original launch, Nintendo released the legendary DS Lite. This is great because let's be honest, while the original DS had proven the concept, the launch hardware was a little goofy. I mean, it had a chunky, somewhat toy-like design, and it had a relatively dim pair of screens that it honestly left a lot to be desired, especially compared to competitors like the PSP, which by all measures was a straight-up technical marvel. Thank goodness that the DS Lite was a complete transformation. It brought an iPod aesthetic with its sleek, glossy finish and slimmed-down proportions. The whole package was 21% lighter and nearly 40% smaller. The screens were also significantly improved too. They're much brighter with better color and contrast. The battery life also jumped up from around 6 to 10 hours on the original to a solid 12 to 15 hours on the DS Lite. Nintendo really listened to the feedback. Even some of the smaller annoyances got addressed, like the stylus was repositioned to the side to be more accessible, and the power button was moved to prevent accidental presses. It was the same DS experience, just, well, better in pretty much every possible way. The DS Lite was actually my very first DS. I remember the summer of 2007, I really wanted a copy of Pokemon Diamond and I didn't have a DS yet, so I spent my entire summer digging a garden for my mom. And while it sucked and it was hot, at the end of the day, I got myself a white DS Lite and a copy of Diamond, and I had a great 6 months playing that game nonstop. Actually, probably a lot more than 6 months, until I traded my DS in for $20 in store credit from GameStop because I wanted to buy an Xbox 360. And the 360 red ranked after like 2 weeks, and I was sad. You wonder why I've made so many negative GameStop videos? That runs deep. But in all seriousness, I cannot understate how massive the sales for the DS Lite really were. If someone owns a DS at any point in their lives, odds are it was probably a DS Lite. By the end of its life cycle, the Nintendo DS family would sell a staggering 154 million units worldwide, with the DS Lite accounting for the large majority of those sales. Now, as successful as the DS would end up being, let's explore a little bit of an alternate DS timeline. So, put yourself in Nintendo's shoes. How do you follow up the incredibly loved DS Lite? Well, I think most people would say, well, you come out with a DSi, right? And that's technically true, but we almost got something very, very different. Back in 2020, we got a truly wild look behind the curtain with what's been called the Nintendo Giga Leak, a massive treasure trove of internal documents and development materials that leaked online. And for me, one of the most fascinating discoveries is something codenamed MG20. Here's what we know. In 2006, while the DS Lite was flying off shelves worldwide, Nintendo was already deep into developing a proper successor. The original DS was certainly a step up hardware-wise from the Game Boy Advance, but it did lag behind Sony's PSP when it came to raw graphics horsepower. So Nintendo embarked on creating what was essentially a supercharged DS, a DS2 perhaps. Now, according to the leaked documents, Nintendo was working with a company you might have heard of before, NVIDIA. Yep, same NVIDIA that would eventually power the Switch about a decade later was already working with Nintendo on this mystery DS2. Now, this is a little bit of a side note, but NVIDIA in the mid-2000s was just beginning to make some serious moves into the mobile space. They were in the middle of developing what would become the Tegra chip, which eventually ended up in the Switch and all manner of other devices. I don't think it's a stretch to say that working with Nintendo on the MG20 might have been one of the first big steps for NVIDIA to get into the mobile space, period. And again, NVIDIA, that's a company that ended up, doing pretty good. I think they've sold a GPU or two, made $1 trillion or two, or three. From what we can piece together, development was moving along at a good pace, with working hardware prototypes up and running by the end of 2006. But then, nothing, well, at least in the Giga Leak. Now, of course, the MG20 never saw the light of day, and Nintendo has never officially acknowledged its existence. So what happened? Well, my best guess is that Nintendo took a look at the absolutely massive success of the DS Lite and thought, do we really need a new console yet? I mean, you can kind of see the logic, right? Why introduce another generation when they could just chill out and ride that DS gravy train for a little bit longer and sell another 100 million consoles? And well, that's pretty much exactly what they did. Instead of the powerhouse MG20, we got a much more modest revision 2 years later. But it is a really interesting what-if moment in gaming history, though. If Nintendo had gone through with the MG20, we might have seen a very different company over the next decade. I mean, would they have seriously tried to compete with raw horsepower? Would the 3DS have even existed? What would the Switch look like? I mean, we'll never know, but a super, super interesting look at what we almost got. Back to boring old reality. In 2008, we did get the successor, which was the DSi, priced at $169.99. While not as exciting as the MG20, it actually was a reasonable mid-cycle refresh that brought some interesting new features to the table. First up, the displays were actually larger than I remember before I started doing the research for this video. So it actually came in at 3.25 inches versus the 3-inch screens on the DS and the DS Lite. And maybe that's not a massive difference, but I mean, hey, who doesn't appreciate an extra quarter of an inch? Especially when you only got 3 inches to work with. For your DS, both screens. I don't know why that got weird, I'm just gonna move on. But the real headline feature was the addition of not one, but 2 cameras, one facing the player and one facing outward. Now these weren't exactly high resolution powerhouses at just 0.3 megapixels each, but they did fit the cool vibe of the DS line. The camera app had a bunch of photo booth style filters to distort your face and add silly effects. I mean, it was a little scuffed to be sure, but you could see that there was a reason why DSi cameras still show up in weird places like concerts sometimes. The DSi also added an SD card slot for storing photos and music. But the game changer was the introduction of the DSi Shop for downloadable DSiWare. Now this was Nintendo's first real digital storefront on a digital handheld. Digital, downloadable, DSi Shopware, DSiWare. I got all the buzzwords. Kentaro Mita, a project leader at Nintendo, said, quote, "It was definitely when we added the shop function, which allows you to use your Nintendo DSi to buy and download software. That was a big turning point. Users being able to supplement the unit's internal software later on was certainly attractive, allowing users to customize their own DS by adding their own software later. I think it's quite an attractive aspect of the unit. No, I think he was onto something. This whole downloading games thing, it might just take off." The DSi Shop hosted hundreds of smaller, often experimental titles that wouldn't work well as a full retail release. Things such as the bizarre camera game WarioWare Snapped or the creative animation tool Flipnote Studio. Hardware-wise, the DSi quadrupled the RAM of the DS Lite and used a CPU that was about twice as powerful. Sounds great, right? However, this extra power saw really minimal use in retail games. Why? Well, developers primarily targeted the massive existing install base of original DS and DS Lite systems. Creating DSi exclusive or enhanced titles would have fragmented the market and, in reality, added a lot of extra headache in development. So only a handful of games truly tapped into that extra horsepower, and the vast majority of them were the downloadable DSiWare titles. You know, the games that were exclusive to the DSi. Now there was one significant downside to the DSi. Nintendo dropped the Game Boy Advance slot. That instantly killed backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Advance's massive library. It also meant no more using the GBA slot accessories like the Rumble Pack for Metroid Prime Pinball, the Guitar Hero Grip, or the Motion Pack for Tony Hawk's Motion. It did streamline the hardware, but it was a definite trade-off and the final nail in the coffin for the Game Boy line. Rest in peace, little buddy. The DSi also has a little bit of a special attachment for me because after I sold my DS Lite to GameStop and didn't have a DS for a while, I actually used my very first YouTube check back in 2010 to buy myself a DSi as well as a copy of Pokemon Heart Gold. I remember my check was $175 for, I think it was like June of 2010, and I was so happy. I'm like, I can make a bank account and deposit this, but can I get it cashed and take it to Walmart and buy a DS? And honestly, really smart call. No regrets. The DSi ended up being pretty successful, selling around 41 million units worldwide. That's obviously a far cry from the DS Lite's numbers, but it was still impressive for what was essentially just a mid-generation refresh. And Nintendo, they weren't quite done with the DS family just yet. 2010 brought one final revision, the DSi XL. As the name suggests, Nintendo took an unexpected turn. They went bigger, much bigger. The DSi XL featured significantly larger 4.2-inch displays compared to the 3.25-inch screens on the regular DSi. Now, this is actually a pretty unusual move for the time. Remember, this was an era where products were routinely getting smaller, not bigger. We had the iPod Nano, the Game Boy Micro, and there were even rumors of an iPhone Mini rather than the iPhone Plus Pro Max Chunkless Edition that we're all familiar with today. Now, the idea was to create a more comfortable experience, especially for older players who had, shall we say, larger sized hands? I mean, as a certified big hand boy, I always have huge hands and like to play on bigger DSs. Actually, I like the regular DSi. Actually, that was like the sweet spot. I never liked the DSi XL. But don't tell Nintendo! The DSi XL also featured improved battery life over the standard DSi, despite those larger screens, and it came in more sophisticated color options, although to me, the glossy finish looked a lot cheaper than the matte DSi, which I will still say is one of the nicest feeling consoles of all time. However, the DSi XL wasn't long for this world. It hit the market at a time where it was becoming increasingly clear that Nintendo was gearing up for a true next generation handheld. By the time the DSi XL launched in North America in March of 2010, rumors were already swirling about Nintendo's next big thing, the 3DS. That, however, is a story for another day. I can't tell you how much the DS means to me and to millions of other gamers. The Nintendo DS family is the second best-selling video game console of all time, with over 154 million units sold worldwide, only slightly trailing the PlayStation 2 at 155 million. Although if you're watching this video in 2030, the Switch may have toppled the PS2 as the sales king, and it's only just a little bit behind right now, and that might make the DS only the third best-selling console of all time. But look, the DS's importance goes far beyond just sales numbers. It completely transformed Nintendo's approach to hardware design. the willingness to take risks with unusual features. I mean, it became a cornerstone of Nintendo, leading directly to things like the Wii having motion controls, the Switch's hybrid nature, and the Wii U was in there too. The DS also dramatically expanded what it means to be a gamer. Again, those titles like Brain Age, Nintendogs, and the thousands of other casual titles, it attracted people far outside the hardcore gamers who wanted FPSs and StarCraft on their DS. Actually, that would have been good. I would have played StarCraft on DS. But the thing is, this strategy of going after non-traditional players, like families, I mean, it would become Nintendo's bread and butter going forward. Most importantly, the DS proved yet again that raw horsepower isn't everything in the gaming world. Despite being significantly less powerful than Sony's PSP, the DS outsold it by almost 2-1. It was a lesson that Nintendo has taken to heart ever since. Experiences matter a lot more than just cutting-edge technology. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring-a-ling that ding-a-ling. Don't mind me, I'm gonna go play some Pokemon Diamond on my newly unboxed DS. The dual screen, the delightful system, the is what I like to call the DS. I think that's a video. I feel good with that. Let's cut. That's good.